Do you ever wonder if you've been marked? You survived the spectral sales event. You've seen the haunting results of life consumed by cheap thrills and impulse buys, courtesy of Wally Wimp and the Emporium. Now we move beyond the satire. Tonight we open the door to the true source of that mundane dread. This is the launchpad for a brand new series, Steel Shadows, Visions of Richard Matheson. Across 10 episodes, we will analyze how Matheson's iconic tales, from robot boxers and steel to the road rage paranoia of Duel, directly mirrored the shadows in his own life. We'll explore the real life trauma of a World War II veteran, the painful losses that informed his domestic horror, and the Hollywood frustrations that fueled his sharpest satire. The fear we confront tonight is more fundamental. It's the realization that you are merely expected to conform, expected to vanish into the relentless pattern of the ordinary. Prepare to venture into the mind of a master, prepare to see the world as Matheson did, where the uncanny twist is never far from the mundane truth. The curtain is up. The shadows are gathering. SL Tonight, Anthology, begins. Good evening, seekers of the strange, and welcome to SL Tonight, where we unravel the twisted genius of Richard Matheson, the horror pioneer who crafted 14 novels and 16 Twilight Zone episodes. I'm Felix Lebeski, your host for Steel Shadows, Visions of Richard Matheson, a series celebrating the man whose stories lampoon his career. World War II scars fueling dread, pulp roots birthing satire. In the 1950s, Matheson was in Missouri, fresh from war, writing for magazines like Galaxy, inspired by a real-life joke craze that made him ponder humor's hidden origins. The Splendid Source grew from that curiosity, a tale of a journalist hunting the origin of dirty jokes, reflecting Matheson's aim to blend comedy with the uncanny. It was first published in Playboy in 1956 during his early days of submitting to pulps, and it captured his skill at turning everyday absurdities into a mystery that questions society's secrets. The story is not only showcases his humor, but also hints at his later Twilight Zone work, where laughs hide horror. Let's chase this absurd mystery. Here is the Splendid Source. Then spare me your slanders, and read this rather at night than in daytime, and give it not to young maidens, if there be any. But I fear nothing for this book, since it is extracted from high and splendid source, from which all that has issued has had a great success. Balzac, Comtes, Drôlatiques, which I totally fucked it up. Prologue. It was the one Uncle Lyman told in the summer house that did it. Talbot was just coming up in the path when he heard the punchline. My God, cried the actress, I thought you said sarsaparilla. Guffaws exploded in the little house. Talbot stood motionless, looking through the rose trellis at the laughing guests. Beside his contoured sandals, his toes flexed ruminatively. He thought. Later, he took a walk around Lake Bean and watched the crystal surf fold over and observed gliding swans and stared at the goldfish in thought. I've been thinking, he said that night. No, said Uncle Lyman, haplessly. He did not commit himself further. He waited for the blow, which fell. Dirty jokes, said Talbot Bean the third. I beg your pardon, said Uncle Lyman. Endless tides of them covering the nation. I fail, said Uncle Lyman, to grasp a point. Apprehension gripped his voice. I find the subject fraught with witchery, said Talbot. With? Consider, said Talbot. Every day, all through our land, men tell off-color jokes in bars and at ball games, in theater lobbies and at places of business, on street corners and in locker rooms, at home and away, and a veritable deluge of jokes. Talbot paused meaningfully. Who makes them up? He asked. Uncle Lyman stared at his nephew with the look of a fisherman who has hooked a sea serpent, half awe, half revulsion. I'm afraid, he began. I want to know the source of these jokes, said Talbot. Their genesis, their fountainhead. Why? Asked Uncle Lyman, weakly. Because it's relevant. Because these jokes are part of a culture hereto unplumbed. Because they are an anomaly, a phenomenon ambiguous yet unknown. Uncle Lyman did not speak. His pallid hands curled limply on his half-read Wall Street Journal. Behind the polished octagons of his glasses, his eyes were suspended bearings. At last, he sighed. "And what part," he inquired sadly, "am I to play in this quest?" "We must begin with the joke you told in the summer house this afternoon. Where did you hear it?" "Culprit," Uncle Lyman said. Andrew Culprit was one of the battery of lawyers employed by Bean Enterprises. "Capital," said Talbot. "Call him up and ask where he heard it." Uncle Lyman drew the silver watch from his pocket. "It's nearly midnight, Talbot," he announced. Talbot waved away chronology. "Now, this is important." Uncle Lyman examined his nephew a moment longer. Then, with a capitulating sigh, he reached for one of the Bean Mansion's 35 phones. Talbot stood toe-flexed on a bearskin rug while Uncle Lyman dialed, waited, and spoke. "Culprit? Lyman Bean. Sorry to wake you, but Talbot wants to know where you heard the joke about the actress who thought the director said sarsaparilla." Uncle Lyman listened. "I said," he began again. A minute later, he cradled the receiver heavily. "Prentice," he said. "Call him up." "Talbot? Now!" A long breath exuded from between Uncle Lyman's lips. Carefully he folded his Wall Street Journal. He reached across the mahogany table and tamped out his 10-inch cigar. Sliding a weary hand beneath the smoking jacket, he withdrew his tooled leather address book. Richards heard it from George Sharper. CPA Sharper heard it from Abner Ackerman, M.D. Ackerman heard it from William Cosner, Prune Products. Cosner heard it from Rod Tassel, manager Cyprin Club. Tassel heard it from O. Winterbottom. Winterbottom heard it from H. Alberts. Alberts heard it from D. Silver. Silver from B. Fyron. Fyron from E. Kennelly. By an odd twist, Kennelly had heard it from Uncle Lyman. "There is complicity here," said Talbot. "These jokes are not self-generative." It was 4 a.m. Uncle Lyman slumped, inert and dead-eyed, on his chair. "There has to be a source." Uncle Lyman remained motionless. "You're not interested," said Talbot incredulously. Uncle Lyman made a noise. "I don't understand," said Talbot. "There's a situation pregnant with diverse fascinations. Is there a man or woman who's never heard of an off-color joke? I say not. Yet is there a man or woman who knows where these jokes come from? Again, I say not." Talbot strode forcefully to his place of musing at the 12-foot fireplace. He poised there, staring in. "I may be a millionaire," he said, "but I'm sensitive, and this phenomenon excites me." Uncle Lyman attempted to sleep while retaining the face of a man awake. "I have always had more money than I needed," said Talbot. "Capital investment was necessary. Thus I turned to investing the other asset my father left, my brain." Uncle Lyman stirred. The thought shook loose. "Whatever happened," he asked, "to that society of yours, the SPCA? The Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. The past. What about a sociological treatise you were writing? Slums, a positive view, and consequence. Is there anything left of your political party, the pro-disestablishmentarianists? Not a shred. Scuttled by reactionaries from within. What about bimetallism?" Talbot smiled ruefully. "Passé, dear uncle. I've been reading too many Victorian novels." "Speak of novels, what about your literary criticisms? The use of the semicolon in Jane Austen, Horatio Algiers, the misunderstood satirist, to say nothing of Was Queen Elizabeth Shakespeare?" "Was Shakespeare Queen Elizabeth?" corrected Talbot. "No, uncle, nothing to doing with them. They had momentary interest, not more. I suppose the same holds true for the shoehorn pro and con, eh? In those scientific articles, Relativity Re-examined and Is Evolution Enough?" "Dead and gone," said Talbot patiently. "This project's needed me once. Now I go on to better things." "Like who writes dirty jokes," said Uncle Lyman. Talbot nodded. "Like that," he said. When the butler set the breakfast tray on the bed, Talbot said, "Redfield, do you know any jokes?" Redfield looked out impassively through the face that improvident nature had neglected to animate. "Jokes, sir?" he inquired. "You know, jollities." Redfield stood by the bed like a corpse whose casket had been upended and removed. "Well, sir, once when I was a boy I heard one." "Yes?" "I believe it was somewhat follows, when it is a portmanteau, not a—" "No, no, Talbot, I meant dirty jokes." Redfield's eyebrows soared. The vernacular was like a fish in his face. "You don't know any?" said a disappointed Talbot. Begging your pardon, sir, if I may make a suggestion. May I say the chauffeur is more likely to... You know any dirty jokes, Harrison? Talbot asked through the tube as the Rolls-Royce purred along Bean Road towards Highway 27. Harrison looked blank for a moment. He glanced back at Talbot, then a grin wrinkled his carnal jowl. Well, sir, there was this guy sitting by the burlesque runway eating an onion, see? Talbot unclipped his four-colored pencil. Talbot stood in an elevator rising to the 10th floor of the Galt Building. The hour ride to New York had been most illuminating. Not only had he transcribed 7 of the most horrendously vulgar jokes he had ever heard in his life, but had exacted a promise from Harrison to take him to the various establishments where these jokes had been heard. The hunt was on. Max Axe, Detective Agency, read the words on the frosted glass door. Talbot turned the knob and went in. Announced by the beautiful receptionist, Talbot was ushered into a sparsely furnished office on whose walls were a hunting license, a machine gun, and framed photographs of Seagram Factory, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in color, and Herbert J. Philbrick, who had led 3 lives. Mr. Axe shook Talbot's hand. What can I do for you? He asked. First of all, do you know any dirty jokes? Recovering, Mr. Axe told Talbot the one about the monkey and the elephant. Talbot jotted it down. Then he hired the agency to investigate the men Uncle Wyman had phoned and uncover anything that was meaningful. After he left the agency, Talbot began making rounds with Harrison. He heard a joke the first place they went. There is this midget in a Frankfurter suit, see? They began. It was a day of buoyant discovery. Talbot heard the joke about the cross-eyed plumber in the harem, the one about the preacher who won an eel at a raffle, the one about the fighter pilot who went down in flames, and the one about the 2 Girl Scouts who lost their cookies in the laundromat, among others. I want 1 round-trip airplane ticket to San Francisco and a reservation at the Hotel Millard Fillmore. May I ask, why? While I make the rounds with Harrison today, a salesman at Lady Undergarment told me a veritable cornucopia of off-color jokes exists in the person of Harry Schuler, bellboy at the Millard Fillmore. The salesman said that during a 3-day convention at that hotel, he heard more new jokes from Schuler than he had heard in the first 39 years of his life. And you're going to... Uncle Lyman began. Exactly. We must follow where the sport is strongest. Talbot, why do you do these things? I'm searching. For what, damn it? For meaning. Uncle Lyman covered his eyes. You're the image of your mother, he declared. Say nothing of her. She was the finest woman who ever trod the earth. And how come she got trampled to death at the funeral of Rudolph Valentino? Uncle Lyman charged back. That is a base canard, said Talbot, and you know it. Mother just happened to be passing the church on her way to bring food to the orphans of the Dissolute Seamen, one of her many charities, when she was accidentally caught up in the waves of a hysterical woman and swept to her awful end. A pregnant silence billowed the vast room. Talbot stood at a window looking down at the hill at Lake Bean, which his father had poured in 1923. Think of it, he said, after a moment's reflection. A nation alive with off-color jokes. The world alive. And the same jokes, Uncle. The same jokes. How? How? By what strange means do these jokes overlap oceans, span continents? But what incredible machinery are these jokes promulgated over mountain and dale? He turned and met Uncle Lyman's mesmeric stare. I mean to know. At 10 minutes before midnight, Talbot boarded the plane for San Francisco and took a seat by the window. 15 minutes later, the plane roared down the runway and nosed up in the black sky. Talbot turned to the man beside him. Do you know any dirty jokes, sir? He inquired, pencil poised. The man stared at him. Talbot gulped. Oh, I am sorry, Reverend. When he reached the room, Talbot gave the bellboy a crisp $5 bill and asked to hear a joke. Just a note here, just because he's a reverend doesn't mean he doesn't know a dirty joke. I'm just saying. Schuler told him the one about the man sitting by the burlesque runway eating an onion seed. Talbot listened, toes kneading inquisitively in his shoes. The joke concluded, he asked Schuler where this and similar jokes might be overheard. In fact, I think the funniest dirty jokes I've heard from preachers and reverends. Just saying. Schuler sat at a wharf spot known as J.V. Jones' locker. Early that evening, after drinking with one of the West Coast representatives of Bean Enterprises, Talbot took a taxi to Davy Jones' soccer ground. Entering its dim, smoke-fogged interior, he took a place at the bar, ordered a screwdriver, and began to listen. Within an hour's time, he had written down a joke about an old maid who caught her nose in the bathtub faucet, the one about the 3 traveling salesmen and the farmer's ambidextrous daughter, the one about the nurse who thought they were Spanish olives, and the one about the midget in the Frankfurt suit. Talbot wrote this last joke under his original transcription of it, underlying changes in context attributable to regional influence. At 10:16, a man who just told out Talbot, the one about the hillbilly twins and their two-headed sister, said that Tony, the bartender, was a virtual faucet of off-color jokes, limericks, anecdotes, epigrams, and proverbs. Talbot went over to the bar and asked Tony for the major source of his Louisiana. After reciting the limerick about the sex of the asteroid vermin, the bartender referred Talbot to Mr. Frank Gruen, salesman of Oakland, who happened not to be there that night. Talbot at once retired to a telephone directory where he discovered 5 Frank Gruens in Oakland. In a booth with a coat pocket sagging change, Talbot began dialing them. 2 of the 5 Frank Gruens were salesmen. One of them, however, was in Alcatraz at the moment. Talbot traced the remaining Frank Gruen to Hogan's Alley in Oakland, where his wife said that, as usual, on Thursday night, his husband was bowling at the Moonlight Mattress Company All-Stars. Quitting the bar, Talbot chartered a taxi and started across the bay to Oakland, toes and firmament. Veni Vidi Vici. Gruen was not a needle in a haystack. The moment Talbot entered Hogan's Alley, his eyes was caught by a football huddle of men encircling a portly, rose-warmed speaker. Approaching, Talbot was just in time to hear the punchline, followed by an explosion of composition laughter. It was the punchline that intrigued. "My God," cried the actress, "I thought you said a banana split." This variation much excited Talbot, who saw it as a verification of a new element, an interchangeable kicker. When the group had broken up and drifted, Talbot accosted Mr. Gruen and introduced himself, asked where Mr. Gruen had heard that joke. "Why'd you ask, boy?" asked Mr. Gruen. "No reason," said the crafty Talbot. "I don't remember where I heard it, boy. Excuse me, will you?" Talbot trailed after him, but received no satisfaction, unless it was in the most definite impression that Gruen was concealing something. Later, riding back to the Millard Fillmore, Talbot decided to put an Oakland detective agency on Mr. Gruen's trail to see what he could be seen. When Talbot reached the hotel, there was a telegram waiting for him at the desk. Mr. Rodney Tassel received long-distance call from Mr. George Bullock, Carthage Hotel, Chicago. Was told joke about midget and salami soup. Meaningful? Ass. Talbot's eyes ignited. "Tally," he murmured. "Oh." An hour later, he had checked out at the Millard Fillmore, taxied to the airport, caught a plane for Chicago. 20 minutes after he left for the hotel, a man in a dark pinstripe approached the desk clerk and asked for a room number of Talbot being the 3rd. When informed of Talbot's departure, the man grew steely-eyed and immediately retired to his telephone booth. He emerged ashen. "I'm sorry," said the desk clerk. "Mr. Bullock checked out this morning." "Oh," Talbot's shoulders sagged. All night on the plane, he'd been checking over his notes, hoping to discern a pattern to the jokes which should encompass height, areogenesis, and periodicity. It was weary with fruitless concentration. Now this. "And he left no forwarding address. Only Chicago, sir." "I see." Following a bath and luncheon in his room, a slightly refreshed Talbot settled down with the telephone and the directory. There were 47 George Bullocks in Chicago. Talbot checked them off as he phoned. At 3 o'clock, he slumped over the receiver in a dead slumber. At 4:21, he regained consciousness and completed the remaining 11 calls. Mr. Bullock in question was not at home, said his housekeeper. "That's because he probably just went to work. It's 4:20 in the morning." "Well, it doesn't really say." Says his housekeeper was expected that evening. "Okay, so yeah, it's 4 in the morning. What are you talking about, dude?" "Thank you kindly," said bleary-eyed Talbot, and hanging up, thereupon collapsing on the bed, only to wake a few minutes past 7 and dress quickly. Standing in the street, he gulped down a sandwich and a glass of milk. Hell, if he'd waited long enough, he'd have just gone back to the bar. Then hailed a cab and made the hour ride to the home of George Bullock. The man himself answered the bell. "Yes?" he asked. Talbot introduced himself and said he'd come to the Hotel Carthage early that afternoon to see him. "Why?" "So you could tell me where you heard that joke about the midget in the salami suit." "Sir?" I heard what you said, sir, though I cannot say that your remark make any notable sense. I believed, sir, that you were hiding behind fustation." "Behind fustation, sir? I'm afraid the game is up, sir," declared Talbot in a ringing voice. "Why don't you admit it and tell me where you got that joke from?" "Oh," Talbot's shoulders sagged. "All night on the plane, you've been checking, what the hell? "I have not the remotest conception of what you're talking about, sir," snapped Bullock, his words belied by the pallor of his face. Talbot flashed a Mona Lisa smile. "Indeed?" and he turned lightly on his heel. He left Bullock trembling in the doorway. As he settled back against the taxicab seat again, he saw Bullock still standing there staring at him. Then Bullock whirled and was gone. "He'll tell Carthy," said Talbot, satisfied with his bluff. Riding back, he thought of Bullock's agitation, and a thin smile tipped up the corners of his mouth. No doubt about it, the prey was being run to earth. Now, if his surmise was valid, there would likely be. Only a man in a raincoat and derby was sitting on the bed when Talbot entered his room. The man's mustache, like a muddy toothbrush, twitched. "Talbot Bean?" he asked. Talbot bowed. "The same," he said. The man, Colonel Bishop, retired, looked at Talbot with metal blue eyes. "What is your game, sir?" he asked tautly. "I don't understand," toyed Talbot. "I think you do," said the colonel, "and you are to come with me." "Oh?" To find himself looking down the barrel of a .45 caliber Webley Fosbury. "Shall we?" said the colonel. "But of course," said Talbot coolly. "I have not come all this way to resist now." The ride in the private plane was a long one. The windows were blacked out, and Talbot had the faintest idea in which direction they were flying. Neither the pilot nor the colonel spoke, and Talbot's attempt at conversation was discouraged by a chilly silence. The colonel's pistol, still leveled at Talbot's chest, never wavered, but it did not bother Talbot. He was exultant. All he could think that was his search was ending. He was, at last, approaching the headwaters of the Dirty Joe. After a time, his head nodded, and he dozed. To dream of midgets with frankfurter suits and actresses who seemed obsessed by sarsaparilla or banana splits were sometimes called. How long he slept and what boundaries he may have crossed, Talbot never knew. He was awakened by a swift loss of altitude and the steely voice of Colonel Bishop. "We're landing, Mr. Bean." The colonel's grip tightened on the pistol. Talbot offered no resistance when his eyes were blindfolded. Feeling the Webley Fosbury in his back, in the small of his back, he stumbled out of the plane and crunched over the ground of a well-cut airstrip. There was a nip in the air, and he felt a bit lightheaded. Talbot suspected they landed in a mountainous region, but what mountains and on what continent he could not guess. His ears and nose conveyed nothing of help to his churning mind. He was shoved, none too gently, into an automobile and then driven swiftly along what felt like a dirt road. The tires cracked over pebbles and twigs. Suddenly, the blindfold was removed. Talbot blinked and looked out of the windows. It was a black and cloudy night. He could see nothing but the limited vista afforded by the headlights. "You are well isolated," he said, appreciatively. Colonel Bishop remained tight-lipped and vigilant. After a 15-minute ride along the dark road, the car pulled up in front of a tall, unlighted house. As the motor was cut, Talbot could hear the pulsing rasp of crickets all around. "Well," he said. "Merge," suggested Colonel Bishop. "Of course." Talbot came out of the car and was escorted up the wide porch steps by the colonel. Behind, the car pulled away into the night. Inside the house, chimes bonged hollowly as the colonel pushed a button. They waded into the darkness, and in a few moments approaching footsteps sounded. A tiny aperture opened in the heavy door, disclosing a single bespectacled eye. The eye blinked once, and with a faint accent Talbot could not recognize, whispered fervently, "Why did the widow wear black garters?" "In remembrance," said Colonel Bishop with great gravity, "of those who passed beyond." The door opened. The owner of the eye was tall, gaunt, of indeterminable age and nationality. His hair, a dark mass, wisp of gray. His face was all angles and faucets, his eyes piercing behind large horn-rimmed glasses. He wore flannel trousers and a checked jacket. "This is the Dean," said Colonel Bishop. "How do you do?" Come in, the Dean invited, extending his large hand to Talbot. "Welcome, Mr. Bean." He shafted a scolding look at Bishop's pistol. "Now, Colonel, indulging in melodramatics again. Put it away, dear fellow, put it away." "We can't be too careful," grumped the Colonel. Talbot stood in a spacious grace of the entry hall looking around. His gaze settled presently on the cryptic smile of the Dean, who said, "So, you have found us out, sir." Talbot's toes whipped like pennants in a gale. He covered his excitement with, "Have I?" "Yes, you have, and a masterful display of investigative intuition it was." "So, it is here?" "Yes, would you like to see it?" "More than anything in the world." "Come then." "Is this wise?" "Come." The three men started down the hallway. For a moment, a shade of premonition darkened Talbot's mind. It was being made so easy. Was it a trap? In a second, the thought had slipped away, washed away off by a current of excited curiosity. They started up a winding marble staircase. How did you suspect, the dean inquired? That is to say, what prompted you to probe the matter? I just thought. There are all these dirty jokes, shit, and no one seems to know where they come from, or care. Yes, observed the dean, we count upon that disinterest. What man in 10 million ever asked, where did you hear that joke? Absorbed in memorizing the joke for future use, he gives it no thought to its source. This, of course, is our protection. The dean smiled at Talbot, but not from men such as you. Talbot's flush went unnoticed. They reached the landing and began walking along a wide corridor lit on each side by illumination of candlelight. There were no more talk. At the end of the corridor, they turned right and stopped in front of massive iron-hinged doors. Is this wise? Too late to stop now, said the dean, and Talbot felt the shiver flutter down his spine. What if it was a trap? He swallowed, then squared his shoulders. The dean had said it. Too late to stop now. The great doors tracked open. Voila, said the dean. The hallway was an avenue. Thick wall-to-wall carpeting sponged beneath Talbot's feet as he walked between the colonel and the dean. At periodic intervals along the ceiling hung music-emitting speakers. Talbot recognized the Gaut Parisienne. His gaze moved to a pet-appointed tapestry on which Dionysus' axe ensued above the stitched motto, Happy is the man who is making something. Incredible, he murmured. Here, in this house. Exactly. Talbot shook his head wonderingly. To think, he said. The dean paused before a glass wall, and breaking, Talbot peered into an office. Among the first appointments strode a young man in a striped silk waistcoat with brass buttons, gesturing meaningfully with a long cigar, while cross-legged on a leather couch sat a happily sweatered blonde of rich dimensions. The man stopped briefly and waved to the dean, smiled, and returned to his spirited dictating. One of our best, the dean said. But I thought that man was on the staff of... He is. In his spare time, he's also one of us. Talbot followed in excitement and numbed legs. But I had no idea. I presumed the organization to be composed of men like Bruin and Belloc. They are merely our means of promulgation, our word of mouth, as you might say. Our creators come from more exalted ranks, executives, statesmen, the better professional comics, editors, novelists. The dean broke off as the door to one of the other offices opened and a burly, bearded man in hunting clothes emerged. He shouldered past them, muttering two things to himself. Off again, the dean asked pleasantly. The big man grunted. It was a true grunt. He clumped off, but only for a velvet. Unbelievable. Such men as these. Exactly. They strolled on past the rows of busy offices. Talbot tourist-eyed the dean, smiling his Mandarin smile, the colonel working his lips as if anticipating the kiss of a toad. But where did it all begin? The dazed Talbot asked. That is history's secret, returned the dean, veiled behind time's opacity. Our venture does have its honored past, however. Great men have graced its cause. Ben Franklin, Mark Twain, Dickens, Swinburne, Rabelais, Balzac. Oh, the honor roll is long. Shakespeare, of course, and his friend Ben Jonson. Still further back, Chaucer, Boccaccio. Further yet, Horace and Seneca, Demosthenes, Plautus, Aristophanes, Apuleius. Yeah, in the palaces of Tutankhamun was our work done. In the black temples of Ahriman, the pleasure dome of Kublai Khan. Where did it begin? Who knows? Scraped on rock? In many a primordial cave are certain drawings, and there are among us who believe that were left by the earliest members of the Brotherhood. But this, of course, is only legend. And yes, I butchered the shit out of all of those names. For that, I am sorry. Now they reached the end of the hallway and were starting down a cushioned ramp. There must be vast sums of money involved in this, said Talbot. Heaven forfend, declared the dean, stopping short. Do not confuse our work with alley vending. Our workers contribute freely of their time and skill, caring for naught save the cause. Forgive me, Talbot said, then rallying, he asked, what cause? The dean gazed fused on inward things. He ambled on slowly, arms behind his back. The cause of love, he said, as opposed to hate, of nature, as opposed to unnatural, of humanity, as opposed to inhumanity, of freedom, as opposed to constraint, of health, as opposed to disease. Yes, Mr. Bean, disease. Disease called bigotry. A frighteningly communicable disease that taints all it touches, turns warmth to chill, and joy to guilt, and good to bad. What cause? He stopped dramatically. The cause of life, Mr. Bean, as opposed to death? The dean lifted a challenging finger. "We see ourselves," he said, "as an army of dedicated warriors marching on the strongholds of Freudian. Knights Templar with a just and joyous mission." "Amen to that," a fervent Talbot said. They entered a large cubicle-bordered room. Talbot saw men, some typing, some writing, some staring, some on telephones talking in a multitude of tongues. Their expressions were as one intently aloft. At the far end of the room, expression unseen, a man stabbed plugs into a many-eyed switchboard. "Our apprentice room," said Dean, "wherein we groom our future." His voice died off as the young man exited one of the cubicles and approached them, paper in hand, a smile tremulous on his lips. "Oliver," said the dean, nodding once. "I've done a joke, sir. May I—" "But of course." Oliver cleared viscid anxiety from his throat and told a joke about a little boy and a girl watching a doubles match on the Nevis Colony tennis court. The dean smiled, nodding. Oliver looked up, pained. "No," he said. "It is not without merit," encouraged the dean, "but as it now stands, you see, it smacks rather too reminiscently of the Duchess Butler effect, wife of Bath category. Not to mention the justifiably popular double reverse bishop barmaid gambit." "Oh, sir," grieved Oliver, "I'll never prevail." "Nonsense," said the dean, adding kindly, "Son, these shorter jokes are, by all odds, the most difficult to master. They must be cogent, precise, and must say something of pith and moment." "Yes, sir," murmured Oliver. "Check with Wachowski and Soforzini," said the dean. "Also Ahmed El Hakim. They'll brief you on use of master index, eh?" He patted Oliver's back. "Yes, sir." Oliver managed to smile and returned to his cubicle. The dean sighed. "A somber business," he declared. "He'll never be Class A. He really shouldn't be in the composing end of it at all, but—" he gestured meaningfully. "There is sentiment involved." "Oh?" "Yes, it was his great-grandfather who on June 23rd, 1848, wrote the first traveling salesman joke, American Strain." The dean and the colonel lowered their heads a moment in reverent commemoration. Talbot did the same. "And so we have it," said the dean. They were back downstairs, sitting in the great living room, sherry having been served. "Perhaps you wish to know more," said the dean. "Only one thing," said Talbot. "And what is that, sir?" "Why have you shown it to me?" "Yes," said the colonel, fingering at his armpit holster. "Why, indeed?" The dean looked at Talbot carefully as he balanced his reply. "You haven't guessed?" he said at last. "No, I can see you haven't, Mr. Bean. You are not unknown to us. Who has not heard of your work, your unflagging devotion to sometimes obscure but always worthy causes? What man can help but admire your selflessness, your dedication, your proud defiance of convention and prejudice?" The dean paused and leaned forward. "Mr. Bean," he said softly, "Talbot, may I call you that? We want you on our team." Talbot gaped. His hands began to tremble. The colonel, relieved, grunted and sank back into his chair. No reply came from the flustered Talbot, so the dean continued. "Think it over. Consider the merits of our work. With all due modesty, I think I may say that here is your opportunity to ally yourself with the greatest cause of your life." "I am speechless," said Talbot. "That is, how can I—" But already the light of consecration was stealing into his eyes. That was The Splendid Source, a story that springs from Richard Matheson's 1950 pulp days. At 24, back from World War II, Matheson was in Missouri, submitting to magazines like Galaxy, inspired by a joke phrase that made him ponder humor's hidden origins. It lampooned his career, war's absurdity bleeding into satire, his early rejection teaching him to twist the familiar. Writing for Playboy, he drew from vaudeville and radio gags, aiming to show how laughter masked deeper truths. His tale pushed his boundaries, blending comedy with mystery, influencing his Twilight Zone scripts. In the 1950s, Matheson was honing his voice, moving from short stories to novels like I Am Legend, drawn to ideas that question society's undercurrents, humor as distraction, much like horror as revelation. It's a window into what drew him to satire, the need to expose the source of our illusions. Richard Matheson, the visionary behind The Splendid Source, turned a joke chase into a satire of control. Story asks, what's behind our laughter, and who pulls the strings? Join us next time for Steel Shadows, Visions of Richard Matheson on SL Tonight, as we keep uncovering his mysteries. Good night.